G'day, fellow poker wannabes and random YouTubers. Um, Now, the reason I'm making this video is that I started playing poker at a moderate level some years ago, some 10, 12 years ago, with a modicum of success. However, had I known back then what I know now, then that would have been a different story. So, um, one of the questions that many people ask and when they're starting out is, how do I start out? I mean, I know I've learnt poker, and when I say learnt poker, they know what a straight is, they know what a flush is, they know that a flush beats a straight. But how do you really learn how to play poker? Rather than to just say, oh, I've got ace queen, I'll raise that, the flop comes queen 8-2, I'll bet the flop, somebody raises, I call, somebody goes all in, I call, and they show me kings and say, oh, geez, I got unlucky. Well, poker's a little bit more advanced than that. And the reason I made this video is it's basically in response to this forum here. And this forum is excellent. If you really want to know, it was made here by a guy called WCG Ryder. That was his name back then. That was his online name. But it's a guy called Doug Polk, who probably ended up being, through sheer hard work, ended up being probably the arguably the best heads-up no-limit player in the world. And he basically, it makes actually good reading to go through all this and read his journey and how he basically improved in the game. So it's worth a good read. So I just want to give my 2 cents worth. I was no high stakes crusher or anything like that. I played probably my limit on PokerStars was 50 cents, $1, and I was winning at that. And I was ready to sort of test my waters at $1, $2. But unfortunately, about 5 years ago, I guess the Australian government saw fit to ban all online poker. There are some poker sites still that you can play. I'm not sure which ones, but at the end of the day, to me, I think on PokerStars, it's the biggest and you're going to get your toughest opponents. And if you want to improve in this game, it's best to play the toughest opponents. Okay, so where do we start? I'm just started out in poker. I want to know how to improve, and I want to know how to progress. Well, first of all, if you're playing online, and it's the best area where you're going to improve because, like I said, you're going to get people from Russia, and especially I found the Russians are very hard to play. You've got to have these tools. You have to have a hand history and HUD software. And the two main ones are called Poker Tracker and Holder Manager. Now I have Poker Tracker, and it basically looks like this, and it brings you now. As you can see on the left hand side, I'm not going to go into this is, like I said in the introduction, this is basically a general sort of heads up, and that's for you to go away and study this in extra detail. As you can see, I play on Mickey Mouse on Play Money. And why am I playing on Play Money? Well, like I said, the government banned online poker for real money some years ago. What I'm doing why I'm playing this Play Money, even though the players, as you can imagine, are extraordinarily bad. And you can see here, I don't know if you can see this down here, this is Play Money, but I started with 15,000 several weeks ago. I've got just over 4 million, by the way. They've left out all the zero, but that's 4 million up here. And you can see but that means big blinds 1 per 100 hands. If this was real money, I'd be crushing it, what they call crushing it. If you're winning anything greater than 7 big blinds in real money per 100 hands, you're crushing the game. 3, 4 big blinds is your good winning reg. If you're winning, so like I said, but these are and that's just over 15,000 hands. So you can see, and this is the stake that I'm playing at. But the reason I'm playing for play money is that I want to basically get all my pre-flop, what they call pre-flop ranges in order. I'm using this purely as a tool to get my pre-flop, and then later on, as I memorize, basically know all the best ranges. And as you'll see later on, I'll show you what are the things that make weak players. But and then just advance my game, 3-bet pots, 4-bet pots, out of position play, continuation betting, all that sort of stuff. I can use this. So as you can see here, you can see that this is a very, very powerful. And if you want to progress in the game of poker, and it's probably something I didn't really do when I was playing for real money, I didn't sort of look at this as often as I should. Now, if you don't remember anything from this video, remember this. If you've played a session, say for 2 hours, and you've got your poker track and you've got all your hands, go through your hands and study them. And later on, I'll show you a video on how you go about analysing hands. And there are different levels. There's the macro level, the micro level, the micro. Yeah, and basically mistakes are made from pre-flop. So you can see here, for example, there's all these tools that you can use. So for example, if you see raise first in, early position, you can see even here, because I play on what I call these Mickey Mouse play money, I'm raising. But really, if you're playing for real money, 2s and 3s really shouldn't be a raise from early position. Because if you're playing really good players, you're going to get 3-bet a lot, and you really can't be calling these hands hoping you're going to hit trips, because you're only going to hit trips 12% of the time. So in the long run, these are going to lose your money. And there's this tool available where you can show you the hands that win your money and lose your money. But like I said, this in itself, knowing how to understand this takes probably a week. It depends on how many hours a day you but this takes a lot of time in itself to understand its full capability. This is a very, very powerful tool. It's about $900, and if you've got a spare $100, and you're playing online, you can't be without this. And this also gives you a heads-up display, and as you can see up here. But like I said, the purpose of this video is not really about this, because I could go on for hours and hours about this and how to use it. But so you can see here, and these might seem things that you're not familiar with, but as you progress through poker, you get to understand, or do you Google search, what does this mean? Went to Showdown, and won money at Showdown, and VPIP and PFR and all this. And you can see raise first in, that's sort of my range. And then middle position, you can see those ranges, and then the cutoff. Okay, so that's basically, like I said, if you have to go to work at Macca's to get the $100, do it, because you really need this. So that's the first thing you need if you want to play online and you need to improve. The next thing you need to understand is these equity calculators. And I'll talk about equity. You probably think, well, what the hell is equity? But you need to understand equity and how, not necessarily work it out, but these things, there are 3 or 4. There might be more, but these are the most sort of common ones. The first one's Equilab, which is this. And you have to know some of these equities off the top of your head. So let's say, for example, guy's got aces, and this is a typical one, and you're on the button, and you've got a pair of 8s, and you want to know what's your equity versus the aces. You know that pocket pairs versus a higher pocket pair, you're basically 20-80. And so that's something you'll get to know, and you'll know off the top of your head. But what about, let's say, for example, you don't have a pair, you have something like that, and you know that you're doing even worse. King Jack suited might seem like a pretty hand, but compared to aces. Now, the thing of poker, of course, is you're not playing King Jack versus a particular hand because you don't know what that hand is. You'll be playing a range. So let's say, for example, an under the gun, what they call under the gun opens. Now, like I say, I'm not going to say this is exactly what an undergun raise is. And once again, knowing your opponent goes a long way. So let's say you know that and you evaluate, you know the King Jack versus undergun, you've got 42% equity. And how that translates into how you play later on, I'll show you that. Okay, so, but that is a definite must. So download, this is free. So that's the one I use. Flopzilla. Now Flopzilla is another tool, and I'm showing my ranges here. I don't really want to do that. No, I'm only joking. This is a really powerful one. This used to be called just Flopzilla, and only a few years ago they updated and called it Flopzilla Pro. And you can. This is a very powerful tool in showing you how a range. So let's assume that's your under the gun range, and I won't go into what this means. Well, this basically means King 7 suited from under the gun, you're raising 50% of the time. Why is it? Well, you think, well, why 50%? Well, it depends on who you're playing. If you've got guys who 3-bet you all the time, or guy that squeezes, or you got somebody who squeezes you, or something, well, King 7 suited, you maybe, like I said, you may want to fold that, and you only raise it 57% of the time. Well, let's say you'll always raise King 7 of hearts, King 7 of spades, and always fold King 7 of clubs, and that way you know you've got that 50%. But King 7 spades, 10-8, 9-8, all that. So King Jack's another 50% of the time. So let's say you've that under the gun, and let's have a random flop, 10-8, and you've got a pair of fives. Now what this tool does, it says, and you can see here, that with this particular range on a 10-8-7 rainbow board, the under the gun has, and you see these filters there, and it says is pass these combos that pass the filters 44%, or say 45%. So on that board, 10-8 rainbow board, this guy with those filters in place, in other words, he's got an open-ended straight draw, open-ended straight draw and a pair, and if I just hover over that there, I can see that that's the gut shots plus the pair. This is the open-ended straight draw on this flop, so 10 9-9s, 9-8s, and you can see these are the straights, these are the sets. So this guy has hit this board fairly hard, and you, as holding a pair of fives, your equity is 40%. You can see on that board is 40%. So if he makes a bet of a third pot, or half a pot, or 3/4 a pot, or over bets, you now have to use that equity and say, well, can I call or do I fold, or can I? Yeah, I won't go into anything else. But later on I'll show you. I presume that I'm going to make several of these, and it'll be sort of like a step-by-step progress. In the meantime, this is just really an introduction to get you to know that these are the things you must have and you must be familiar with. You must know these tools and how to use them inside out. And that may depends on how many hours a day you want to put into it, into your study. And by the way, that's also another thing. Study. You can't play and do no study. And poker players think, well, I can play for hours and hours and hours. Where the great players come into their own is these guys have put hours and hours and hours of practice or on the table, but they've gone away and studied. And you'll see later on, we'll get to that later on. So you cannot, but the purpose of this video is I'm going to put you on a bit of a structured path, and in knowing how to study, what to study, and what it all means. And being in a structured learning course, you're going to achieve better success, quicker success than sort of randomly reading an item here and playing a little bit and then reading something else, talking about 4 bits. For example, you need to understand your ranges first, and then you need to understand seed betting. You need to understand how to defend against seed betting. So it's all this structured learning rather than haphazardly reading articles and thinking you're going to improve. Yeah, you'll improve a little bit, but it all has to be on a structured course. Like I said, this video is all about just giving you an introductory overview. So this is a very powerful tool, Flopzilla Pro, or Flopzilla, yeah. And there's something else. I won't go into this. I'll talk about that later. And PokerStove used to be the one that first came out. It's hardly used anymore. Now, the third one, probably, I'm not sure if you want to put it into importance. And this is basically, I call GTO solvers. And this is the thing that, now what's GTO solver? What is GTO? GTO stands for Game Theory Optimal Solvers. Okay, big deal. What's that mean? Game Theory Optimal. Okay. When you're starting out at the micro, you're going to have leaks. You're going to have leaks in your game you won't even begin to know. You're going to have leaks like, I'll talk about that later. You're going to have all sorts of leaks, whether you're using wrong ranges. You're going to be having a passive style. You're going to be check folding a lot. You're going to be folding to a bet too often. You'll be calling too often. You'll be 3-betting improper hands. You'll be going all in when you're deep stacked with a pair of 4s, let's say. I'm taking and the other guy's got kings, That's a really an extreme example, but I've seen it online. I have seen it online. Guys going all in with a pair of 4s. Now, you think, well, if you're going to have a bluff hand, you don't use pair of 4s, and I'll talk about that later. So when you're playing in the pool and they're starting off as micro stakes, you're going to be playing players of different capabilities. There'll be some good players, some guys who've been playing, for a while, and there'll be some guys who aren't so good. And these are the guys you make your money off if you improve and if you know what hands to play, what hands make good 3-betting hands, what hands to call with, or how to defend in the big blind, what are good check raising hands, so game theory optimal. So if I'm playing, let's say, this guy, a donkey, I can use what they call exploitative play. In other words, I can exploit his weaknesses because, like I said, he's going to call too often. He's not going to fold, or for example, when you've got your HUD, when you're using PokerTrack, like I said, it's got a HUD. And one of the statistics is went to showdown. Now, if you're what they call a balanced player, in other words, a player that plays close to what they call GTO. In other words, you don't 3-bet too often, you don't fold too often, you don't call too often. You'll on this road, I'll talk about what are the optimal sort of statistics. In other words, to be a balanced player. But if I'm playing, like I said, the donkey, I can pick up all sorts of leaks in his game and play on an exploitative level. okay? Because there's no use me playing GTO against a donkey, because I'll still win using GTO, but I'll make even more money using exploitative play, okay? However, let's say I think I'm a shit hot player and I go to the World Series, or, you know, and I meet up with this guy. Well, first of all, let me tell you about this guy. This guy's name online is a guy called Linus Love, and he's probably the best cash online player in the world. So that being said, he's going to pick holes in my game like there's no tomorrow. He's going to be putting me in such a hard spot. Now, for me to be able to deal with that, the only way I can play him, because I won't be able to pick up any exploit or any holes in his game, but he'll be able to pick my game apart. So my only defense against him is to use what they call, well, use game theory optimal. And that is my only way I'm ever going to be close to playing him. So there are three main ones, and each one has a different purpose. There's the Piosolver, which I use. And let's just quickly... this has basically revolutionized the way I think about poker. And let's just say I'll load a tree up, what they call loaded. Where is it? No, sorry, excuse me. Load the tree, and we'll go big blind versus button, single raise pot, and we'll just wait for this. And this is revolutionised. Like I said, this has made me think completely different about the game. Now, why is it important to understand GTO? Because if I understand GTO, and GTO is basically, you're almost like playing perfect, okay? There are other arguments, and I don't want to delve too much into it because it's a very complicated, but you're basically playing perfect. Now, however, when you're talking about GTO, you know, it's like anything else in the computer world. If you're putting garbage into it, you're going to get garbage out. So it's important to put all your inputs to build your tree. So you've got this, and you pick your strategy. So OOP means out of position. So if I'm in the big blind and somebody, I don't know, middle position raise, and I call with this basically, you can see that most of my range is checked. Now, I don't want to, why is it checked? Well, I don't want to get into it because otherwise this thing will go on for hours, this video. But that is my response to a guy middle position. So I check. Now, the guy in position, let's say the middle player, he can see that 50 on this board, 952, he checks 54% of the time, and he bets, and you can see these bet 99, bet 60, bet 33. These are all different bet sizes that this guy can use. And we can go through here, for example, on a pair of 10s, you can see why is this guy betting all the time big? And then you've got a pair of aces, geez, you know, and you're checking. You like, for example, if you go down, if you look on the bottom right hand and where you see ace of spade, ace of heart, you can see that 77% of the time, that 0.77 is actually, you convert it to a percentage. It means 77% of the time he checks. And you think, that's a bit strange. Why would he check? Once again, I don't want to go into it because, like I said, this is not about talking about each. You can Google, you can work out how PO works. There's Piosolver's YouTube videos. Like I said, this game is very, very complex, and people think that they can just, you know, sit down and think, oh, I've hit top pair, I know how to play poker. Well, poker's a lot more, and this is why I've been interested in the game for many, many years, and especially once I had this. By the way, this is not cheap. This is $700, and I've got the Pro version. You can get the, and this is only to analyze post-flop. You can get the Edge version of this, and it costs you over $1,000 US, but I'm not interested because there are other solvers that you can do pre-flop. Get to that later on. So, and once again, you think, well, why do I bet tens? And that's subject for other videos. Through your study, you'll know why. But that's basically, that's PO. And so let's say, for example, this guy bets, you call, 6 of hearts comes. Now, it says once again, most of the time you're checking your range. So you check, and you can see what the best response is for the guy in position. As it says there, IP decision. Like I said, this is a very complex. You could see, I think, I'm not sure. You can see when I ran these, you have a look at the size of these files, 10 gigabytes, just for that. Yeah, that's a 10, nearly 11 gigabyte file size. So it took well, I think it took 20 odd minutes to run, but it's a very powerful. However, you as a micro analysis, you're not really ready. There's a million other things you have to get into place before you start advancing. There's this other thing called GTO Plus. It's linked to the guys that made Flopzilla have also done this as well. So that's another one. And then there's Piosolver. That's a pre-flop and a post-flop solver as well. Okay, so these are things that you need to invest money to make money in, unfortunately. And like I said, this poker tracker is about $900. These are free. Flopzilla cost me $25 and PO, but yeah, you have to. Okay, so what makes a weak player? Well, the biggest leak weak players have is they play bad ranges. In other words, let's say in a 6 max game, they might raise, or they might raise Queen 10 of hearts. And you say, well, and you give them the argument, well, Queen 10 of hearts is not really going to do well. And we can talk about playability and all that, but they'll look at you and say, well, it just looks pretty. Well, unfortunately, a hand looking pretty is not enough to play good poker. You have to talk about all sorts of things. We'll get to that later on. So, and you can spot them once with your HUD and you're playing online. You can see that there's the real bad players. You call them whales. So 100 hands and they'll play 58, 45% of the time. So bad players, weak players play bad ranges, and they're not positionally aware. And what do I mean by positionally aware? Well, the earlier position, you start off with a tighter range, and as you get towards the button, you start opening your ranges because there's less people that you have to contend with. So that's being positionally aware. So like I said, under the gun, you're very rarely opening 2s and 3s, especially if you're sort of in tournament play, and you have a look at videos on YouTube, you see the guys when they're playing high stake, they got a pair of 2s, pair of 3s, and there's, say, 8 at the final table. They throw them in the muck because like I said, they're not a winning hand. You've got to hit a set to be a winning hand, and like I said, and they don't realise their equity. Now that's another thing we'll get into later on. Weak players play passively, limp too often. Well, this is the biggest, and playing these guys online, and you have a look at them with the play money, they all limp. Very rarely does people take aggressive action, and you'll see with Doug Polk's thing, the weak players play passively. And if you want to be a winning player in poker, you have to play aggressively. Now, having said that, there's the next level. You can see high stakes players, they can limp, and they'll limp with aces sometimes. That's it's called a mixed strategy. Because if you always, but at their level, they're on another level of thinking, and we'll get to that later on, but they're on another level of thinking. Okay, so they limp, but there's a reason why they limp. They just don't limp for the hell of it because you think that, oh, I'm under the gun, I've got Queen 10 off, I'll just limp because I don't think it's strong enough to raise. Well, that's not good enough. You either say to yourself, well, I've got 7 more players. I go, Queen 10, is that really going to do me a favour? And say if somebody isolates me, what they call isolation bet, am I able to call Queen 10 off? Highly unlikely. So they end up folding that money that they've put into the pot they've just wasted. And believe me, if you're playing hundreds of thousands of hands and you play like that, you're going to be a losing player very quickly. Okay. The third point, I think I touched on that. They aren't positionally aware. In other words, you have a look at their weak player, you'll see that, under the gun they raise 25% of the time, middle position 27% of the time, late position 29% of the time, and buttons say 42%. So they're not positionally aware, they don't have proper ranges. And this is also another thing with weak players, improper bet sizing. And you think, well, and this is a note that I've kept when I was playing poker. This is the one thing that it's just so obvious. Big equals big, small equals more. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, weak players, when you've got a big hand, they'll bet big. And when they've got a weak hand, they'll like min bet, and if the hand gets to showdown, invariably you'll see that with the big hands, they've been betting big. Now, when you have a look at YouTube and you have a look at the pros, they bet big. They bet big with the big hands, but they also bet big with their bluffs. In other words, they make themselves balanced. And so when you're playing these guys, you think, oh, geez, is he bluffing? Because I've seen him do it with a bluff. Is he always your betting? So that is a dead giveaway. And when you play online with all the micros players, you'll see that this is their one big leak. Now, this point number 5, level 1 thinking. What is level 1 thinking? Well, level 1 thinking is because you can think on different levels when you're playing poker. First level is you think, oh, I've got queens. I've got ace queen and the flop comes queen 9-7. Oh, I can bet that because I've got a pair of queens. And I'm not worried about what the other guy's got. I'm just worried about what I got. So level 2 is I'm starting to think, oh, what's the other guy got? He's called me, so what can he call me with? Can he call me Jack 10? Can he call me Queen Jack? Can he call me King Queen? So that's level 2. Level 3 is what I think the other guy thinks that I have. So that's level. And then level 4 is what I think that he thinks that I think that he's got. So it gets quite, like I said, this game is ultra complicated. And the weak players only play on level 1, maybe might make level 2, but on a very low level. In other words, let's say, for example, when I say level 2, they say, oh, on an ace, king, 7 flop, you bet into them, and they go, oh, I knew you had ace, king. Well, no, you don't think like that. You think on ranges. You don't think that as soon as somebody says to you, oh, I knew you had the ace or something, well, these guys are bunnies. You're going to be attacking these guys all the time, because if they're thinking about just one hand, they're not thinking in ranges. They're not thinking on a level 2 that you should be thinking. You should be thinking in ranges, not just what hand have I got and what hand you think you've got. You're talking about ranges, and I'll talk about that in another video. Like I said, who knows how many videos I'll end up making. Okay. Now, common terms you must understand. Now, I once heard somebody say to me, he said, oh, poker's all about luck. And actually, to a certain extent, that's what makes it attractive to people, because they get lucky. And believe me, I experienced this several years ago. I won quite a bit of money and I played, and this is going about 7 years, maybe, I don't know, 8 years. I knew nothing about the game, but I won quite a bit of money because I was lucky. Knew nothing about the game. I knew a bit about pot odds and things like that, but nowhere near what I know now. So these are things you must know. You must know inside out. You must know how to work it all out. These things when I first started, I read books on it, and I really didn't sort of absorb it. And it came a point in time I thought, oh, geez, I'm starting to lose here. What's going on? So I revamped my whole game, and I just started to study and study and study. So pot odds, it's the ratio between the size of the total pot and the size of the bet you're facing. Now, there are times when you use pot odds and there are times when not. And the most obvious one or the most common one is, let's say you get to the river and the guy makes a bet. You use the pot odds to see whether the call is going to be profitable or not. And how do you work out pot odds? It's the amount to call divided by the total pot size, and I should have put in there, after you call. So let's say, for example, you get to the river and the pot's $100 and the guy makes a half bet pot size. He bets $50. What are the pot odds? So the pot odds is basically the amount to call. The guy's bet 50, so you've got to call 50, and the total pot size after the call. In other words, it started off being 100. The guy's put in 50. There's 150, but then you've got to put in your 50, so that's 200. So it's $50 over 200 gives you 0.25. What does that mean? Well, you multiply it. Normally pot odds expresses a percentage. It's 25%. So what does that mean? Well, it means that your hand has to have 25% equity or better, in other words, to be a profitable call. Now, equity, what the hell is that? Oh, and by the way, you think to yourself, well, I'm playing tournaments or whatever. How am I going to count all the chips and how to work it all out? First of all, you have to remember that what the bet is. And when you're starting out, it's really because you've got so many things going through your head, and it's just overbearing, especially when you're playing online. But luckily online you can see what the pots are. You don't have to. But when you're playing live, it gets a little bit more. So you have to remember all the bets and work out a rough estimate of the pot. Online, it's a lot easier because you can see it right there and then. So this you have to commit to memory. There's no other way. So if somebody bets a quarter of the size of the pot, you know that you need 16% equity to call. If he bets half pot, as we worked out before, that's 25% or better to call. If the guy has $100 and he puts in 100, your equity needs to be 33% or more to call. Okay, so we talked about equity. So equity is the amount of the pot belonging to a player based on his odds. So, and the way I thought, I had not struggled, but I thought, well, how does that sort of relate? And you can actually relate it to sort of when you buy a house. Let's say, for example, you buy a house in 500,000. You've only got 100,000. The bank leaves you 400. Your equity in the house is only 1/5 of the total value, so it's 20%, and that's basically it's your share of the pot. Basically, that's what equity is. So, like I said, if you kings versus aces, as we worked out before, let's say, for example, you've got aces and somebody else has got kings. 80% of the time, and I think we talked about it here, I think, and we work out the equity, we'll see that's 80, 82, 18, say 80, 20, roughly 80, 20. Well, what does that mean? It means that 80% of the time aces is going to win. If we run it 1,000 times, 819 times, aces are going to win. And kings are going to win 18% of the time. So 1,000 hands, it's only going to win 180 times. So it will win, but only, like I said, there it is there, 18.06. So if, like I said, if it's 100, if we ran this 100 times, and at the end of the day, it's all about the maths, and I'll show you how to actually use equity, and that'll be my next video, basically, how we use all these terms, these fancy terms, in order to make good poker decisions. The next thing, expected value. Now we're starting to get into the guts of it. The average result of a play if it was played thousands of times. So for example, and a play can be described as plus EV, EV is 0, and negative EV. Now, let's say for example, plus EV means it's the most, for example, let's say for example, you're in the button and someone who bets, you can either fold and you've made an EV decision. That's why you can make EV at 0. You've actually folded, and an EV of a fold is 0. Now you can either check call, right, and that could be a plus EV, or you can check fold. In other words, let's say for example you fold too much, and that'll be a minus EV, or you can check raise, and that might be even a better EV, a more positive EV play. Now, of course, poker being sometimes you can make a positive EV play and still lose. So don't think that every time you make a positive EV player, let's say for example, you can go in with say aces and you get them cracked. In other words, somebody calls you a kings and a king comes on the flop, and that's about variance. And that's another thing. When you're playing online, it's because of variance, you have to have a good bankroll management. Once again, I should have put that as about with weak players. Weak players don't have very good bankroll management. They just lose $100, make another $100 deposit, play on, at stakes they shouldn't play, lose that, make another deposit. So, okay, and the third, and the other one here is equity realisation. Now, for years I played and I had no idea until one day I saw a video and light bulbs were going off in my head. And what is equity realisation? The percentage of the pot a hand is expected to win based on its raw equity. That is, the degree to which a hand will be to claim its calculated equity in a hand matchup. So the factors that impact equity realisation, we'll go actually. So I'll show you an example of what I actually mean, because like I said, that really, if you're starting out, doesn't really mean a lot. But there are factors that can impact on equity realisation. The biggest one is, of course, position. Let's say somebody opens on the button and and you're in the big blind, you call. The guy in position will be more than likely to realise their equity than you who's out of position. The reason being, big reason is because the guy in position closes off the action, whereas you being out of position, and position being of prime importance in poker, you don't get to realise your equity, because you can check and the other guy checks and he hasn't hit the board, and the ace comes on a turn and he can realise his equity. You've got a pair of tens, you've checked, so an ace comes, he realises his equity, and now you're behind. So position is a big factor in playability. Okay, well hopefully this is obvious. The stronger the hand, the better chance to realise his equity. That's common sense, really. But also suited connected cards realise their equity better than offsuit cards, and I'll show you that. Let's say, for example, Jack 10 suited. You have a look over here. This range is set 38.6. In other words, the chances of making top pair, you can see up here, 15%, and two of a kind, flush, blah, 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 quads, full house 0.09, flush 0.82, straight 1.3. But it can make top pair or better and plus these flush draws, open-ended straight draws with one card, and it makes, that's 38.58%, whereas let's say Jack 10 off, 30%. Now, you can see that the Jack 10 suited has a lot better playability than the Jack 10 offsuit, which has only got 30% of the time has hit the range. We haven't got a range. This is just a way a hand can hit, is playable basically. So that's why you see that, playing suited cards, connected cards, a lot better than playing, say, unsuited. And when you see, like, for example, see how this range, you can see that, you're playing 10-8 suited, 10-9-8. So you're not playing 9-8 off, 10-8 off, because the reason why you're playing those cards, you've got to have what they call board coverage. So that's why you play 9-8 suited. If you're only going to raise with aces, kings, queens, jacks, king, queen, ace, queen, and the flop comes 9-7-3, well, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to be checking, or you're going to be betting. And so it's for board coverage. So you can see that that's why it's better to have them suited and connected. So that's what the playability. Stack to pot ratio. Okay, so the deeper the stacks, the more equity the player in position will realise. What is stack to pot ratio? Exactly what it is. Let's say the stack is the effective stack. In other words, what I mean by effective stack is, let's say you're playing and you've got an effective stack, or you've got 1,000 stack, and the other guy's got 500. Say, and the pot is 100. So the stack to pot ratio is not your 1,000, it's the effective stack, it's the shortest stack at the table. So it's the 500 divided by the pot, which is 100. So the stack to pot ratio is 5 to 1, or sorry, 5. No, yeah, 5. Now, the bigger the stack to pot ratio, or the deeper the stacks, the more equity the player in a position will realise. And I hope that sort of makes sense, because he can leverage his stack more against your short stack. Because let's say, for example, the stack to pot ratio is 1 and the flop come 10-8-7, you've got ace 10. Well, on that short stack, you can be sure that you can go all in, because you're such a small stack to pot ratio, and pairs perform very strongly against when it's a small stack to pot ratio. Pairs perform better than if it was a lot deeper. For example, you wouldn't go all in with ace 10 on a 10, say 8-7 board if the depth of the stacks is, say, you're 300 deep, because the other guy's going to call you with kings, queens, aces. Whereas if you're 10s, you can go all in with a short stack to pot ratio, because the other guy could have king, queen, ace, king, ace, jack, all that sort of stuff as well. So the deeper the stacks, the more the guy with a bigger stack will realise his equity, because he's got the bigger. He can leverage his stack a lot better off your small stack. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, now we talked about equity realisation. Okay, so say we're in an MTT, which means multi-table tournament. We're six-handed. Well, I don't know. Yeah, we're six-handed. The blinds are 100, 200. And say and in poker we say, when we're referring to us, you call yourself the hero. I don't know. That's what we do. And we're in the big blind. We hold 3-2 suited. Okay, and under the gun opens, and we see that. Well, let's assume that that's his range down there, 5 plus 8, 9, king time. It might not be the right range, but hey, let's assume that. And he opens at 2.5x. What 2.5x is 2.5 times the big blind. So if you multiply 200 by 2.5, you get 500. So he opens for 500. So remember, we talked about odds, and why is it important? You've got to be careful how you use these things. The first thing we say, so if we just say, well, we're going to work out the direct pot odds. Now, years ago, players incorrectly used direct pot odds to work out, is it profitable to call? So we have to call 300 because we as the big blind, we've already had 200 in. So we have to call 300 to win 1100. Now, why is 1100? Well, the guys raised it to 500. There's a small blind of 100 and there's 200 in there from the big blind. So that's 800 plus the 300 call we have to make. So it's 1100. So we need, the pot odds is 300 divided by 11, 27 or 0.27, which is 27%. Okay, now do we have pot odds? If we look at Equilab, we see that, look at that. 3-2 suited against that range has got 70%, has got 30% equity, which is better than 20. We'll call. Can we make the call? No, wrong. Why? Equity realisation. Because let's say the flop comes ace, king, 7. You check. I doubt if you're going to donk bet. In other words, lead out. He bets. What are you going to do? Let's say for argument's sake, and you're really bad, you're going to call, which you shouldn't, but anyhow. Okay, so you call. The flop, the turn comes, another 7. You check. What do you do? He bets. What do you do? You're never going to realise 3-2 suited, the equity that this hand has, because you're never going to get to the river. So you're going to fold. So if you use just direct pot odds to work out if this hand is a profitable call or not, then you're going down the wrong track. You need to understand equity realisation. That's when, like I said to you before, when I came to realise the importance of equity, it opened up the whole new sphere for me, and my game took on a new perspective. Like I said, light bulbs started going off in my head. So this is really, really important for you to understand about equity realisation. Do as much reading as you can on this, because this is super, super important. And talking about that, I just want to show you, this is how important it is. This Piosolver has got a thing called Range Explorer, and I'll show you what Range Explorer does. This is huge, very, very powerful. You can have a look at, it shows you here imposition equity on this, if we remember, on this 9526 board. You can see the out of position equity. On this flop, you can see the guy out of position has a better equity until he sort of the 60th percent, what they call 60th percentile. I don't want to go into, I know this may seem like overbearing for you, and these are all the things that, the straight sets 2 pair. But here, you got a thing called EV on EQ means equity real. This is your equity realisation. Oh, hang on, sorry, my apologies. That there shows you your equity realisation, and this is the in-position player. He's got a huge equity realisation advantage over the guy that doesn't have that. So you've got to understand, and like I said, this is super powerful. It's only until you get past the 90th percentile that you start to sort of catch up to the player in position's equity realisation. So, like I said, this takes ages. If you really need to get your head around this to really and put hours and hours of study into this. Find every YouTube video you possibly can. Read as much as you can on this, because if you get your head around this and understand this, you'll realise just where you've been going wrong in poker, and it'll, like I said, it'll open you up to a whole new game. So this is that's what EQR, equity realisation, and which player has the better equity realisation than the other player. Okay, I think I've rabbited on too much. What are we gone? Well, 54 minutes. Okay, that's it for me. I'll wrap it up. And whatever comments you make, hopefully I'll be able to answer them. Until that, I'll see you next time. Cheers.